So I can say welcome to everybody who is connecting in to today's talk. This is another seminar in the series that we are running, the Institute for Northern Studies at the University of Highlands and Islands and Perth Museum and Art Gallery together. We've had a grant from the Royal Society of Edinburgh to work on medieval kingship and kingship rituals. As part of that, we had a number of workshops and a number of public talks. So this is one of the public talks. And today we are delighted to have Dr Anouk Busset, who is a researcher in archaeology at the University of Glasgow. And she's going to be talking about her research project and the research she's been carrying out over the last few years. And I was very happy to tell you that the work that she will be talking about today will be part of her book, which is forthcoming. It will be out in the autumn. The title is Carved Stones and Christianization. It sounds fantastic. Very much looking forward to that. So I will give the word to Anouk in a second. But first of all, I also wanted to tell you that if you have any questions during the talk, you can just put them in the chat and we will read out as many as we can when Anouk is finished, and she will do her best to answer your questions. So please, Anouk, go ahead. I'll give the word to you.
Thank you very much for this very kind introduction, Alex. And so I'm going to be disappearing now because my poor Wi-Fi connection at home doesn't really like both the camera and the PowerPoint at the same time. So I'm very delighted to have been invited to present at this series of seminars, and I really hope you'll enjoy this. We will today take a journey through northwestern Europe, starting in Scotland, but we'll continue to Ireland, Norway, and Sweden. And the idea is to look at places linked to royal rituals and carved stones in early medieval landscapes. So I will now start sharing this here and up. Et voilà. Right. Excellent. So up. So the presentation today will be looking, as I said, at these different areas in northwestern Europe. And I'm going to be focusing on 4 main case studies. First of all, the Constantine cross and Fort Cheviot, and the question of the royal figure and royal landscape in Scotland. Then we'll be moving to the high crosses and royal inauguration at Clogher and County Tyrone in Northern Ireland. Then we'll be looking at a very impressive site in Hauge and Jæren in Western Norway. And then we will finish our journey quite literally looking at the Eriks Gata and the assembly places and runestones and in Sweden. So one of the elements that that are going to be drawn out of this discussion today, even though we are going to be looking at very different type of sites, and of course, the chronologies are also quite varied in here. When I'm saying that it's early medieval, but basically we are starting, some of the sites are being used since the 2nd century AD up to much later, like in the late medieval period. But the period that really interests us goes from about the 4th century, 5th century AD to about the 11th century AD. And as you will see, of course, because we're talking about early Christianity, Christianization didn't happen in a kind of uniform way all across Europe. So we're going to be looking at different places at different times. But the very interesting elements that we're going to be focusing on as well are specifically the layout of each site discussed and the topography and archaeological remains, etc. Looking at the carved stones themselves, we'll be looking at their specificities, biography, etc., the imagery of the stone or inscriptions, and what role they played on the site where they are erected, and how, if at all, we can connect those stones to the ritual links to kingship. At the time they were erected and beyond. So the main geographical areas, this is a very wide map, but it's like where carved stones were erected during the early medieval period, specifically linked to the early stages of Christianization. And as you can see, it's really something that we can see a lot throughout the northwestern Europe. And the sites that I'm going to be talking about here today are the Fortivet in Scotland, Clogher, Hauge here, and Annonshög and Aspalert in Sweden. So the first case study that I'm going to present today, I'm sure a lot of you here are very familiar with it, so I might not spend too long on it. However, it is a fantastic site, and it has so many rich elements to it. It's the site of Fortivet, situated in the valley, the Strathmore Valley, the Strathern Valley, sorry, and what was the southern kingdom of the Picts in the early medieval period. It is a very important landscape, sacred landscape, with evidence of ceremonial activities from the Neolithic to the medieval period. And you can see here David Simon's interpretation of the picture squares, or the imagined interpretation of that, of the station of the sites, appear through several phases. And for the period that interests us, we even have oh, sorry, I think it got there a little bit. So the early medieval occupation of the site appears through several phases, and at first during the 5th and 6th century, with evidence of cultic and funerary activities, as you can see here through the reinterpretation of David Simon's the Pictish Square Barrows, situated close to the prehistoric complex. And so there's this kind of direct connection, this proximity, which suggests a conscious and voluntary connection by the early medieval people in Fortivet to a sacred visible past. And this practice of erecting a monument or using a landscape during the early medieval period that is directly connected to a sacred past, very visible monument in the case studies that I'm presenting today. So the site itself of Fortivet is extended on a very wide scale, and it's delineated on its northern and southern edges by 2 pieces of monumental sculpture. As you can see to the north, there is the Dumpling Cross or Constantine Cross here, and to the south, the Inve Cross. And the Dumpling Cross or Constantine Cross is not, of course, located on its original location anymore. It is now moved to the Saint Cerf Church in Dublin, as you can see it here on the left. So the site itself is, as I said, a very wide site that is delineated on both of its northern and southern edge, and it seems to be, it is associated to its royal, just that it was, the site itself was suited for a very large congregation, maybe a gathering site for a royal inaugurations. And the sheer size of the site and of the landscape suggests that. And the site then of Fortivet was replaced by Scone for the royal inauguration from the 11th century. But up to that point, that was where it seems that the most of the royal inauguration were happening. Fortivet has a very large collection of high quality sculpture. Interestingly, only the Constantine Cross is a complete monument. I'm very sorry, I seem to be jumping in and out of the connection. If you will excuse me, I hope on your side you can hear well. So I was saying that Fortiviot has a large collection of high quality sculpture, but only the Constantine cross that I just showed is a complete monument. And this reinforces the idea of a presence of a major ecclesiastical center under royal patronage on the site of Fortiviot. And thus the monument itself of the Constantine cross is evidence of very important moment in the time of the Southern Kingdom of the Picts for many reasons. One of it is that in the 1990s, an inscription was rediscovered by Professor Catherine Forsyth, which mentioned, which only the first couple of lines is readable and mentions Constantine, son of Fergus. And thanks to this, it was finally possible to possibly date it roughly to the 9th century. But beyond that, it also on the monument itself represents a lot of connection on a wide scale, because the decoration of the monument itself prizes scroll vines that we find in the Northumbria sculpture, a representation of doves that were connected by Isabel Henderson to the connection of St. Columba and Iona, and of course the representation of the kind of interlaces and key patterns that are very common in Pictish sculpture as well. So the site itself, its sculpture shows connection to ritual practices, both on a Christian level, of course, with the representation of the cross, but also on a secular level, as the stone monuments would have been part of a wider use of that landscape. And so the site itself is it's again, as I was saying, visibly connected to a prehistoric part. It's a place of royal assembly, but also it's possibly linked to royal inauguration. And this is reinforced and emphasized by the presence of this monumental sculpture in this monumental landscape. Right. I'm just going to have a look at the comments to see if there are more problems. Okay, thank you very much, and sorry for the break. I keep having the PowerPoint cutting, so I'm very sorry about this. I will just continue, and please let me know if there are like major issues. We are going to be now moving on to the royal inauguration site at Clogher in County Tyrone in Northern Ireland. So that site is situated in the valley of the Blackwater River, and it's a very rich and arable land. It's along the main road connecting the Loch Earn to the west and the Loch Nea and Armagh to the east. It was once the capital and royal inauguration site of the Uí Cramthain, who dominated the area from the 6th to the 9th century. You will, I hope, excuse my terrible pronunciation of the Gaelic names here. They were the main dominating tribe in the area until their defeat against the Kenelnoan in the 9th century. After that, the royal inauguration site itself was abandoned until the ecclesiastical site grew in importance on the same place. So the site is composed of two main focal points. You see here to the south, it's the 5th century royal inauguration mound, which is about 15 meters in diameter and has a big oval enclosure and a triangular knoll on its southern edge where the royal inauguration rituals would have taken place. And then to the north of the site, you have the early monastic foundation situated on the site of a now modern church that you can see here. The excavation carried out on the royal settlement shows that there were also high status activities on the knoll itself, such as metalworking, and also presence of important pottery dated from the 7th century. The excavation, it shows that the importance of the site, but also its wider connections. And so, as I was saying, there's at the south here, you have this triangular knoll, which is worked to flatten the top. And Patrick Gleeson, who has worked extensively on inauguration site, has demonstrated that that was actually part of where the heart of the rituals was happening. So if we're looking at the ecclesiastical site itself, first of all, the written sources record the foundation of Clogher monastic in the 5th or 6th century. However, it seems that it became a bishop see in the 9th century, which is interesting because it corresponds to the time when the Kinross took over the power of the place, and then the inauguration site was abandoned. And as you can see here, today there are 2 remaining high crosses on the site, but they are composite monuments. They are not originally, they are not the original monuments. The sources indicate us that there were about 5 original monuments to start with, and they are not visible anymore. And those 2 that we can see here now today are the remnants of these 5 crosses. Now, something that I always really like to see when I went there is that how visible the royal inauguration mound is visible from the crosses. And the high crosses would have been erected at the time this ecclesiastical center became a bishop see. And the carved stones would have played a very important role probably in the direct landscape around that area. And we have for this in the written sources, the Book of Milling, that is a kind of ideal representation of how crosses are located around ecclesiastical sites to mark the different kind of stages of sacredness within the site and how they are marking the passage to entering the ecclesiastical site. And this is actually similar to what we see in Armagh. Finally, the sacred nature of kingship in Ireland from prehistory to the early medieval period is documented by multiple written sources, and it is visible through the landscape associated with it. And during the Christianization process, strong associations are created with these sites by early churches and early ecclesiastical sites, and through the carved stones as well, particularly high cross. And interestingly, we could even say that these the high crosses played a part in the creation of the Christian identity of the landscape. And in the 9th century, the church was seeking to stabilize and strengthen its power, and it appears that it did so through the reuse of these earlier sacred landscape. Interestingly, however, the ecclesiastical sites, in any cases in Clogher at least, it's set at the edge of the earlier structure, but it does not encroach upon it, as you can see here. But still, the royal inauguration sites in early medieval Ireland include both the spatial and sacral construction of kingship, and high crosses erected so close to it might have enhanced or affirmed the Christianity of the site while altering the nature of the sacred kingship itself. So now I'm going to present to you some completely new research material that I've been carrying out through my postdoctoral research that I started about 1.5 years ago. And this site is a little bit different to the one I'm presenting today because we can't exactly connect it to kind of medieval kingship. It is a possibility that it was early royal local site, but there is so much going on in there that I really wanted to present it to you today. And it's very interesting because quite similarly to the site of Clogher, we have a lot going on looking at rituals and ceremonies happening from a very early time, from the first century AD even. And then it gets, well, as you can see here on the image, it has like a strong representation of Christianity as well. And this site particularly shows a continuous occupation linked to sacred rituals and power up to the end of the 10th century or even early 11th century. So this is the site of Hauge in southwestern Norway, and it includes three main sites or foci within the site. First, the Tinghak, which is the assembly mound, the crosshaug, which you can see on the picture below in the background, and then Dusiane, which is a court site. We have about 30 known court sites in Norway. Most of them are situated, as you can see on the map to the right, on the western coast of Norway. And I was very excited to present that to you today because it's really something that we find in Norway and doesn't seem to be appearing in other areas as in the same kind of structure or layout. The one that we're interested in today, as you can see here, is in the area of Jæren, which is in the southern part of Norway here. And it's the commune of Klepp, very close to Sola and Stavanger in modern day. And the site that is interesting us here is the site that you can see on the map, as called Dusiane. So first of all, the structure of the site, and I hope through that you will also kind of understand my excitement about it because it just shows how rich the site is. So the site, actually, I'm going to be focusing on Hauge itself, but there is actually two main farm lands and farm territory that are in the same place, which is that there's Hauge farm to the west and Two farm to the east. And the site that I'm looking here at Hauge is situated just below the ridge that separates both of these sites. So you have this very clear ridge. As you can see, this is the modern path, but it's still following that ridge. And on the right side, you have Hauge farm, and on the left side, you have Two farm. But before I'm just showing you this ridge, I just want to show you a little bit the site itself. So we have here in 2A, have the first mound when you enter the site from the north east here. We have the number 1, which is the modern entrance to the site, but part of the historical entrance to the site would have been situated close to that. And then when you walk along this ridge, you then encounter Tinghak, which is this very high ground mound where most of the assemblies are situated. And then just going to the right, you have the crosshaug where the big Christian cross is situated, and then Dusiane just here, which is this court site. Tinghak is it's a very what tells us that it's a very important site from very early on. It's the highest point in Jæren. It's situated at 120 meters above sea level, and from it you can see a huge amount of the landscape around, and you can see all the way to the North Sea, as you can see like straight ahead, and to the left you can see part of the fjord. And as you can see, I was very lucky the day I went to visit that place because the sky was clear, which doesn't happen that often in Norway in May. And it was absolutely fantastic. And from that very high site, you have this incredible visibility. And here it's almost a 360-degree panorama. Just next to the site, so this is Tinghak taken from the Crosshaug site, and the Grönhaug, which is just maybe 40 meters north of the assembly mound, is Viking age burial mound from a warrior, a man, a male who has been buried there with his weapon and his shield, and a very kind of typical Viking age burial ground. Tinghak itself probably was in use since very early on. There are traces of activities and ritual activities on that site from the 3rd century AD at least. And this has been visible through, for instance, the discovery of 16 gold foil pieces, small pieces that were scattered on the slope of the Tinghak and found between Grönhaug and Tinghak. I'm just gonna again take a very short pause. No, okay, so everything seems to be fine on your end. Great. And as you can see, so this picture was taken from the cross, and you can see how raised and visible this mound is. The Crosshaug itself has its name from the cross that you can find on top of it today. However, it is also on a raised land that is just maybe 30 to 50 meters away from Tinghak, and it has on it was found the burial of a woman who was buried there in the 4th or 5th century AD, and she had absolutely impressive burial goods buried with her. I couldn't find an actual picture. The only representation of the grave goods that I found were drawings, but you can see a silver-gilded massive brooch here to the left, and other golden and silver objects, and this very intriguing anthropomorphic face mask in bronze that was also found in the tomb. Unfortunately, as most of the excavation that are carried out on these very visible places, this was made in the 19th century. So of course, a lot of the context for these objects is lost today. But the more current interpretation of that burial suggests that this was probably a very important woman, possibly a local queen or the wife of a local king, who had like magical properties linked to her, and the whole area and rituals seems to be linked. That her burial seems to be one of the focuses of the area. And finally, so I will come back to the cross, of course I will, but I wanted before that to present this incredible court site, Duziane, that is situated on the kind of northwestern edge of the site. So this court site is recorded from the 5th or 6th century. And current research, so for a very long time, it was thought that these court sites that are found all on the western coast of Norway were mostly abandoned by the end of the 6th century in the early Iron Age. However, current research, recent research from Frode Iversen from Oslo has shown that a lot of these sites are actually still in use between the 7th, 8th, or even 9th century. So there were always this thought that there were these very impressive sites, court sites where inauguration and rituals would be happening. But, and then there was this kind of gap between the 6th century to the 9th or 10th century when there are the early stones and then the early churches built. But apparently these sites remain in use for a very long time. And to the top left here, you can see the structure and layout of that site, which is actually constituted of 16 houses that you see the reconstruction of on the right-hand side. And at the center of it, you have this mound. This one was not excavated in a lot of different court sites, and some of which were excavated recently have shown that those are usually artificial mound that doesn't include burials or etc., but are more connected to feasting and ritual feasting and communal feasting during those periods. And so these houses, it's a bit baffling what is happening there. And Frode Iversen is proposing that, well, there's a lot of different interpretation of what is happening there. And these sites could have been used for a lot of different things, as I was saying, ritual, inauguration, but also political assemblies, religious assemblies. There's also traces of military assemblies happening there. So there is not just one answer to that question. But there seem to be some specific areas that are connected to ritual activities, and this kind of center mound is one of. And another very interesting feature on that side, particularly that is quite rare, is this kind of triangular mound that is found just at the edge, just outside of the range of houses. So towards the bottom of the side, on our side, you can see 4 little mounds that are also represented on the recreation, on the drawing on the right side, and those are burial mounds. On the other side, this kind of triangular mound, same thing as the central one. This one has not been excavated, but it seems to be connected to rituals and ritual activities that were performed on that site. When you see just this reconstruction, it's kind of hard to see the sheer magnitude of this site. And so if you look at the bottom left picture, I actually took that picture from, so you can see in the background, there's the Tinghak mound, the mound of the assembly, and the Grönhaug just next to it. I took that picture from the center of this court site, and you can see these big house bases that are visible just around, and it's absolutely gigantic. So here again, you see just kind of a footprint of how Diziane look like, and which is very common to all this court site. And again, to the right, the direct connection between the center of the court site and Tinghak. So it's a very direct connection in that landscape. Going back to the cross itself, so for a very long time, looking at that site, it was believed that the cross was placed much later than after the site was stopped being in use. But as I said, this latest research from Frode Iversen seems to really be demonstrating something different. And so in that sense, the site itself of Hauge was never a major ecclesiastical site, contrary to Clocher. But there seemed to be a very visible, acts of Christianization of the site by the erection of that stone, and also of the discovery of Runestone on the neighboring farm in Two. And this monument, sadly, we can't exactly know what its original size was, but it was probably close to 3 meters tall, because it's been toppled over a couple of times. The latest time was in the 19th century, because it was recorded, and the stone was broken in several pieces. And here to the right, you can see now how it's been creatively reconstructed, let's say, with kind of a big cement shaft that's kind of keeping it together. And also, interestingly, the cross itself has not been placed on the Tinghak. It's been placed on this kind of secondary mound where this burial was found. So what was exactly the reason why the cross was placed there rather than on the assembly mound itself isn't clear. But there is a definitive will of Christianizing the space in a wider scale, if I may say. And yeah, the runestone that I was mentioning before, this runestone was found on the neighboring farm at Two, just on the other side of the ridge that I showed you at the beginning. And there's not that many runestones in that specific area. But this one is interesting because it also has, on one of its face, it has the representation of a male and a female figure, which were later in the folklore associated to a Norse god and associated to fertility rituals. And the kind of folklore, the local folklore tells us that related to the land, but also related to people, were performed up to the 18th century, especially in that area. However, whether this representation of these female and male character here are contemporary to the runic inscription on the site or not, this is impossible to say. But the inscription itself, from both its style, the type of runic letters used, the futhark used, etc., it is clearly defined in the late 10th, early 11th century. And the kind of formulaic way that the inscription is formulaic and tell us exactly how the kind of Christian runic inscription that we find all across Scandinavia and beyond at that time are like. So it says Helgi raised the stone in memory of his brother Ketil. And Helgi is mentioned on another stone found in the Klepp churchyard, about 10 kilometers, 6 kilometers beyond the mound itself. Now, what is interesting about that site in general is that we know that at some point in the 10th century, the ruler of that site battled with one of them. The ruler came from Denmark, who became one of the main kings in that area. And he lost, of course, that battle. And since he lost that battle in the 10th century, the site started to lose its importance, quite similarly to Clogher, even though it's just a century off. However, the site was not completely abandoned, because you do have this runestone and the high crosses that are erected there, but apparently the type of site, the nature of the site changed dramatically at that time. And we also know that in the 11th century, when the big centralization of kingship and Christianity started to happen in Norway, the site of Hauge and Tu little by little were abandoned, and the local magnate actually built a church in Klepp, which is just lower down in the kind of the flat land below. That's where he built his church, and the site then of Tinghak was slowly abandoned. And so the last case study that I'm going to present today, I'm gonna try and pick up a little bit the pace. I'm sorry about this. The last region I would like to talk about today is, of course, Sweden, and more specifically, the Svea Kingdom and two assembly sites that are situated along the Eriks Gata. So the Eriks Gata, or Eriks Road or journey, is attested from the 12th century in written sources. And it's more than just a physical road. It is a very physical road. It's a path that new elected kings who were elected in Gamla Uppsala had to take to be elected in each assembly site. But more than that, it's also a very ritual journey that they had to take. And very interestingly, for our purpose today, runestones are sometimes located at these ritual sites along the road. So Stephen Brink has observed some recurring structure among the sites where these rituals are performed, and some of them are runestones, standing stones, thing mound, like assembly sites, assembly mound, as we've just seen, and all of these are emphasizing the importance of the place, but also the movement that is linked to these ritual and both at the place, but also connecting places along the road. And so the first site that I'd like to discuss today here is Anundshøg, and the second one will be Aspaløt. And Anundshøg, which means the Anund's Mound, is a site where it's situated, as you can see, just northwest of Stockholm, with Eriks Gata, but also associated to royal power. And it is a baffling site, both by its size, but also by its archaeology, the richness of its archaeology. It has several major burial mounds, and it has the largest burial mound in Sweden, the Anundshøg, the mound of Anund that you can see here, which is absolutely massive. And it also includes several ship burials that you can see here in this aerial picture. And on the site itself, if we look at the layout and the kind of geology of the site, is like it's situated along one of the main historical roads. It's situated close to a crossing site of a river, and along the road you have an alignment of standing stones, and one of the main runestones here along the road as well. The runestone reads, Folkved raised all of these stones in memory of his son Hednin, Hanun's brother, and Vred cut the rune. Oh, I think. Oh, I hope you can hear me again. It has cut again. So the mound itself, after which the whole site is named, measures about 60 meters in diameters, and it probably marked the focal point of the Herod, so the assembly place of this area. This site is documented as a gathering place or think site in the 14th century, but it contains so many burial grounds and several sheepsetting that shows that the site was actually in use from the 6th century. And this strongly implies that the site had a very big importance, reaching back to the antiquity, or that the site became again a place of power, being reused or repurposed during the early medieval period. Medieval sources actually record Anundshøg as situated along the Eriks Gata, and thus it is one of these assembly sites where the new elected sphere king would have had to perform ritual. The site of Anundshøg shares actually many similarities with the site of Aspaløt that I'm going to finish my presentation with. It includes the Thing Mound, as I mentioned, Runestone, and also the alignment of standing stone bordering the ancient road. The site of Aspaløt, if you remember, is situated here in the southwest of Stockholm, and it's situated south of the Lake Mälaren that you can see just here on the top of the map. And it's this thing site of the Rune 100 of the local power as well. In that site, interestingly, there are many runestones, as you can see here, but they don't seem to be dating as far back as the one that we have in Anundshøg, for instance. The site itself, if I just go back here, the site itself is delineated at its southern end by a flat-top mound that measures about 4 meters high, that you have here, and 30 meters across, and is delineated by a bridge at its north end, as you can see here. So we have the Thing Mound at the south and the bridge at the north. There are 5 runestones that were originally recorded on the site, 2 close to the Thing Mound and 2 next to the bridge to the north. The 5th stone is only known from a 17th century drawing and has been lost since. The east side of the road is also bordered with an alignment of several standing stone. The ensemble of stone monument at Aspalot formed a bridge monument similar to the alignment that we find in a lot of different settings in Sweden, one of which is very famous, the Jarlabankebro in Uppland and Anudshög that we just saw. So the runestone S137, which is situated the closest to the mound, displays the following inscriptions. On its face A, it said, Thora raised this stone in memory of Earthier, her husbandman. This stone stands in memory of Earthier on the assembly place in memory of Thora's husband. He armed his med in the west. The sun saw this there, etc. The inscription is quite interestingly here mentions directly the assembly site, and for this it confirms the public activities on the site during the late Viking Age. However, archaeological activities that were conducted in 2004 and 5 around the mound have revealed that this is not a burial mound and it's not associated with any structure or deposit. And so that suggests that this is actually a new site, not a reused site using an older structure as focal point. So that interpretation was offered by Alex Sandmark here and Sarah Semple, which interpret that this is the Aspalot is actually a new site and has probably built that mound as a focal point, which actually connects them to other assembly sites. So while the 2 runestones that were situated to the south of the site were erected by Earthier family, the 2 runestones that are situated to the north, close to the bridge, were commissioned by the family of Ragnfrid and Slödi. On one of the runestones mentioned actually the building of the bridge, while the other runestone mentioned the death of Önund and Ragnvald, who were powerful in the Rauningi. Here are the 2 stones in question. And the inscription reads, Slödi and Ragnfrid, they both had the bridge made and the stone raised in memory of Eaglebjörn, their son, and Astrid had these monuments made in memory of Önund and Ragnvald, their son. They died in Denmark, were powerful in the Rauningi and the ablest in Sweden. The name itself, Rauningi, may refer to the name of the Herod, Röno, suggesting that the use of this name at an early time and connecting the commissioner to the deceased to the place, which is something of great importance that we see over and over with these runestones, the kind of connecting the place, the person to the place. And the inscription seems to contain the earliest mention of Sweden, which could be interpreted as a connection to royal power. And that is actually tying even more the site to the Eriksgata and to the fact that it would have been possibly seen as a sign of royal allegiance to the Sphere Kingdom. All right, so to bring all of this together and all this different information from these different sites, if we look at kind of a basic level, looking at the topography of the sites presented, we have and topography and archaeology of the sites is that they are usually in the presence of very visible focal points in the landscape and watercourses, and the monuments are usually situated alongside important historical roads and proximity of ancient sites. And this connection, when it happens, when it exists, like in every other sign than Aspalud, seems to be this connection to a prestigious past. In the case of Aspalud, which is very interesting, is that it seems that both the mound and the bridge and the stones are part of the creation of the site. And different layers are represented through that. The runestones themselves, the carved stones and stones, erected stone themselves, play a very important part as well, both in the creation of the site, whether it's for Christian identity or as part of the wider ritual landscape itself. And in the case of Clogher or Hauge, for instance, it also shows that during the early phases of Christianization and Christianity, those sites where the connection to this ancient ritual past was part of this very important act of connecting this Christianity to these very important past sites. And I think that is me for today, and I'm really much looking forward to your question and discussion. I'm very sorry if this was a little bit up and down because my connection did very strange things. I apologize for this, but thank you very much for your attention. And yes, I look forward to your question.
Well, thank you so much, Anouk. That was fascinating. So many fabulous sites, and you know, just to see you bringing them together and looking at the difference and the similarities is just so fantastic. So you know, I have lots of things I could ask you about, but I'm not going to. I'm going to go and look here at the chat, and you know, there was some interruptions in the sound, but you know, your message got through, so we could, you know.
Okay, but that's great, because it would just completely freeze on my end, so I'm very sorry if it was a bit awkward on your side.
That's very stressful. So yeah, I'm impressed that you kept it going here. Right, okay, I'm looking at the questions here. Oh, of course, no.
Oh my goodness, I see already like 37.
Yeah, well, there's all right, regarding the site in Scotland, you said the square barrows were situated very close to a prehistoric complex. Do we know whether the presence of the barrows represents a continuity of occupation or return to previously occupied site? If it's more likely to be a return, do we know when they went back?
Well, it's a very good question, and it's one that's been asked by archaeologists for a very long time as well. If we're looking specifically at the two kind of complex that I'm talking about, one is Neolithic and the other one is early medieval. So there's a huge gap in between in terms of years. So the fact that there would be a continuity is unlikely. However, we can't rule it out entirely in the sense that these big ritual complex are happening in these big times. However, even though there wasn't anything as monumental in between, that doesn't mean that there were not people around. And certainly when the square barrows are made like this, and this new or recreated ritual landscape is taking shape in the earlier part of the medieval period, the meaning of what was happening before is probably lost, but there was a necessity for this population to actually connect themselves somehow to this prestigious past. So yeah, I can't answer that exactly, but it's unlikely that it's a continuity. However, it doesn't mean that there was no one for like centuries, because it's centuries.
Yeah, thank you. The next question then concerns inauguration rituals. How much and what is known about these rituals? Were they completely Christian in nature?
No, so I can't really answer the first part because I am not a specialist in rituals and kingship. And there were a lot of incredible talks during the workshops that Alex and Mark organized, which are more focused on these aspects. And I can't say that I know enough about this. However, they were definitely not Christian originally. The whole point of sacred kingship is something that is born from much earlier in the Iron Age. And interestingly, it's something that seems to appear in a lot of different societies, and at least in the societies that I've been looking at, the Northwestern Europe, you can see that all across. So it's very interesting to see that actually the early Christian kings, part of all the rituals are retained and then transformed, and then they take a different shape. And in the 11th, 12th century, when big kingdoms and centralized kingdom that are connecting themselves to centralized Christianity in Rome, etc., then things start to really change in terms of rituals. But before that, there's a lot of local things happening, and a lot of things is retained from what comes before, because there's not like suddenly Christianity arrives and things change. It's all going on for centuries again.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I can just add there about the Eriks Road that you mentioned. I mean, that of course appears in written Christian sources and is described then as a Christian thing, but people who have studied the language of the or the terms used, and also the type of rituals, it's clearly a pre-Christian ritual that's been Christianized, and then they add a final, so they ride around the kingdom, and then they add a final thing at Gamla Uppsala, which is the coronation, which is a later Christian thing. So yes, I think you're right, absolutely, that there's layers in everything, and they just keep maybe changing them a little.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just wanted to add something, because I realized I forgot to say something about Hauge as well, is because I'm mentioning the fact that this site kind of come in disuse and starts to be little by little abandoned from the 10th or 11th century. But something that the fantastic book on assembly site that came out last year is showing very strongly is that these larger kingdoms and these larger centralized Christian kingdoms are just not completely wiping what was before. There was something quite similar happening in kind of smaller, more local things. And this is why there's a huge question mark about Hauge. And this is also why I wanted to talk about it today, is that we can't be for sure that it's connected to royal power, but something which is of this magnitude and on this very impressive, I mean, Yeren is quite a large area, and this is really this kind of top point. And it's not because we're not looking at a large Christianized Christian king ritual, as we can see along the Eriksgata. It doesn't mean that we're not looking at something similar, and it also doesn't mean that not something similar was happening in Norway with these kind of secondary sites being part of the ritual journey of these big kings later. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Well, we have a question about Ting and Tinghak, so maybe we can take that one since you're talking about the site. So Jane Ann is asking, interesting the Tinghak. There's a ting or a thing with that view, almost as if this is the area where people will be coming from to the thing. Do you think that's the case?
Can you just repeat that? I'm not sure I understood exactly the question.
Whether the view from the mound sort of represents the area where people would be gathering from and coming to the thing.
Would that be the place where people gather?
And if the view sort of represents the area that belonged to that particular assembly, I think the question is.
Yes and no, in the sense that in that site specifically, we know that there are two main farms there, and the Tinghak is at the kind of it's at the edge of it. So you have one big power thing happening on one side where there's the court site, and there's this other big farmhouse on the other side, which is 2, where the other runestone is found. But also I didn't go into 2 because it's also a major site where there's like more than 50 burial mounds in the whole area. It's really massive. But no, the fact that at the top you can see a lot. I mean, it's part of the same wider area, and possibly there was like the site of Tinghak would have been the kind of assembly site of a wider political unit around. But as you can see, most of Jæren from there, that's huge. So I wouldn't go as far as to say that's the whole thing. The land division in Norway in the early medieval period is incredibly complex as well. And I didn't go into that because I can't even pronounce how you call the different units, because it's very complicated. I had Frode Iversen trying to explain to me, and I was just staring blankly at him for a long time. And I'm very glad everything is written in the book, but I still am not going to go there. But what I mean is that there's a very complex structure in the land division, and it's not there's usually by quarters and by eighths, etc. So I'm not unsure that Tinghak is not the central place of a much wider area, but I don't know, and it would not be surprising. But we don't have the research to back it up just now.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, but yeah, difficult to answer.
Yeah. But it is at the border. It is at the border, which is really interesting in itself. It's so maybe it did. I mean, why were those two farms just separated by this ridge? Why did the main assembly site was just there? Yeah,
that's an interesting question. Yeah, sometimes you do have these sites that sit right at the border between two, so maybe they, responsible for both the areas or for the areas meeting, coming together. Yeah, and these questions have been discussed for Anglo-Saxon England as well. Some of those have very visible profiles, very clear in the landscape, etc. So
I know in Trøndelag, for instance, in the north, that happens in several cases where the court site is actually at the corner of the four different units, and it's right at the center. And people, one of information that Frode told me about this court site was maybe these houses were there to house the different local chieftains. And the fact that there were 16 houses and Tinghak would have been quite interesting as well, because as it's all divided by quarter and eighth, maybe it was like two people coming, etc. But that again are conjecture or interpretations. But why all these kind of large sizable houses in the same places? And one of the interpretation was because maybe these people had to travel from quite far to come to the court site and to the assembly to stay for quite some time.
Well, thank you. Really fascinating. I'm scrolling down here. There's lots of comments. I think we can maybe look for the questions. So one is from David. Anouk, it looks as though the church was quite tactful about the way they approached these traditional secular sites. They supervised from close by without actually invading them with crosses. What's your comment to that?
Well, I don't know if it's being very I don't know what was the word used, very tactful. I don't know if this maybe tactful, maybe also reserved or a little bit wary. I don't know. It's certainly not something that happens everywhere. I mean, it's interesting in Clogher it happens that way. It's certainly not always happened that way. But if you look at Armagh, for instance, which is this major ecclesiastical center, it kind of replaces Navan, which is like 4 kilometers away. And again, they chose a different hill to create their big ecclesiastical center. So I'm not sure how much these I don't want to say new because it's not really new, but these ecclesiastical center, when they really become very important, they are in the kind of eye contact with these older important sites. But how much did they want to? I mean, the reuse of sites, the actual reuse of sites is visible in a lot of different places. Not in the case studies that I choose for today. But it does happen. So I don't know if we can say that it's like this polite. I think there's a lot of things at play. On some sites, probably people are just new, the new is replacing the old, etc. The reuse, the connection to also, see, people are used to go to one place to do their devotion, etc. It can be kind of easier to just reuse the site like that. People keep coming and then you just transform what's happening there. But also sometimes the necessity of a clean cut, and that both happens. So yeah, again, nothing clear cut, I think.
Yeah, thank you. There's a question about Scotland again. Do we have any inscribed materials in runes or in Latin in the vicinity of Fort Teviot, as well as mention of this Pictish royal place in early Scottish Gaelic chronicles?
Well, we have the inscription on the Constantine cross, which is not entirely readable, sadly. It's only the first 2 or 3 lines that are readable, that says Constantine, son of Fergus. And we know that there's like another 4 lines that are just lost to us, sadly. But apart from that, in that area, not so much. I mean, there are written sources. There's this mention of Fort Teviot and palace, the palace of the king in Fort Teviot when he died. But in Scotland, that's the difficulty, and that's what got me to start that project and that PhD in the first place 10 years ago. It was really to say, well, in Scotland we have these fantastic monuments, this fantastic landscape, not so many written sources at all, not so many inscriptions, not in the Pictish area at least. So let's look at what's happening in other places and see if we can draw parallels, even though we're not looking exactly at the same chronology, it's different practices, etc. But it's to look at the fact that stones are erected in a lot of very similar settings, even if we're looking at different time periods, is quite striking for this, because what tells us that we're not looking just at the process that seems to be happening quite widely in these Northwestern societies. And so in that sense, why not would the stones be not used, in similar fashions? Of course, with local specificities, and each population has do their own stuff, but there are some wider things that are happening and that you can really observe. And yeah, hopefully using these different areas help us enrich our interpretation or raise more questions, because we don't have enough.
Always have more questions, don't we? And I'm scrolling down again, skipping some comments, but go to questions. Question from Lilla. Could you tell us more about the 2 runestone and connected local folklore and rituals?
The 2 runestones where?
The TU one, the one from Norway.
Ah, the 2 runestones. Yes. Well, I don't know more about it. I don't know more about it. Yeah, I have. I just have the great picture of it here. It's sadly I'm not even sure it's on display anymore. Here it is. It's a very big one. So here you can see actually better the two people on it and the inscription on the side here. The thing is, with this site, the book that I have in my hand is the most up-to-date publication we have about it, and it's from, when was it made? Like maybe in the 2010s a little bit. It's quite recent, maybe the 5 last years. But the problem with that site is that we would need excavation to be able to bring things forward. We would need to have written sources to bring things forward, and at this stage we don't have that. It's still this book is absolutely fantastic, but it's in Norwegian and it just has short summaries in English at the end. So it's hard to have more information. But from the article written by John Hines in it about these, we just know that locally that stone was known for that. Now the stone has been moved. It's in the Stavanger Museum or Bergen Museum, but you just can't. It was in the storage for a very long time. So where the folklore information were drawn, I am not sure about. I know John Hines did a lot of research about the ritual connected to the stones in that area, but we just have some antiquary information about this, and that's sadly limited to that for now. But no, there's so much more. I mean, Frode Iversen did very deep research on 3 other sites that are really close to this one, and published that in 2017. But I wish someone would do the same level of research in Tinghak, because that site needs this now. And yeah, It's the same as what we have a lot in Scotland and in Ireland. It's like antiquaries research. And so now we are trying to do research from their research, but a lot of context and information is lost from archaeological practices and traditions, basically.
Yeah. Thank you. So there's lots of comments and people who really enjoy it, and they said thank you so much. Bring that in. There's also somebody who's asked whether the recording will be available. Yes, as long as you're happy with that, Anouk, it will be. Yes. That's
I'm
great.
sorry, it's not better quality, but yes, of course, I'm happy, but it's just not great quality.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. The sound will be, the issues will be the same, but I think we'll have to live with that. That's fine.
Yeah.
Anyway, a few more questions, if you don't mind.
No, of course.
So from Alexander, can we not say that Pictish early dynasties tried to build their landscapes as to leave memories of the traditions, and this beyond Christian first incursions? So I guess before Christianity was fully established, I think.
Huh? I'm sorry, I didn't catch the question. Sorry.
So the question is, can we not say that the early Pictish dynasties tried to build their landscapes and to leave memories of their traditions? And I guess Christian is, so they wanted to leave a long-term memory, kinship, I think.
So unfortunately, my Wi-Fi broke a few of your sentence, but if I understood well, can we say whether the kind of early Picts lived alongside the kind of Christianized landscape, or I'm not sure I understand the question.
I think what they're wanting to leave a lasting mark on the landscape, I think.
Well, I already have to be kind of very cautious with the beginning of the question, because the early Picts compared to the Christian Picts, that's a very difficult and a moving area, because since the moment they are called Picts, it's already part of this, the Christianization has already started. It's already part of a Christian identity. So we have the symbol stones, of course, which seems to be a bit earlier, but yes, it's a complicated one, because we don't want to create boxes where there are none, and because everything is moving in that, and both in identities and social construction, landscape construction, a lot of things are fluid. So I think each society, whether they are Christianized or not, wants to leave a mark somehow, and erecting stone monuments is a huge part of this, because you are erecting a monument that is in a material that lives through centuries, and it just leaves us to have to ask even more questions about what were they trying to do there. But the fact that it was before Christianity or not, that's a little bit problematic, because research, the kind of latest research now seems to be showing that really when the notion and identity of Picts appear, it's already part of this kind of early medieval, early Christian societies. So
thank you. Yes, I think we have at least one more question here, or possibly two. So from Claire, she says, as someone who has focused mostly on Iron Age England, I've come across the contentious discussion about fluid or pan-European consistency in disparate cultures. Is it fair to say that by the early medieval times, because the monastic tradition was spreading, it's more accurate to consider it a wider spread, locally flavored culture that crosses our modern concept of borders?
I like that way of writing it. It includes all these nice notions of let's not put boxes. I like that very much. Thank you for that very nice phrasing. Yeah, I think it would be fair. I mean, I agree with the fact that we don't want to just say, well, they're all doing the same. Clearly, that's not the case. There's a lot of local specificities, whether it's in the way they are using those monuments, whether they're using the landscape, etc. But the fact that there are these kind of big trends happening, that's actually why that's actually why I've been looking at those monuments when I was doing my PhD research, looking at those monuments right away, going beyond the geographical areas, because if you start looking at them from our modern geographical areas, you will see all the differences. And I remember having to fight a few times with my panel members who were saying, like, why would you bring in runestones with picture stones and high crosses? And I was like, wait, it makes sense. And it's because I was starting to look at them from thematic approaches, like monument creating movement in the landscape, or monument making places, such as in assembly places, etc., or the kind of identity and commemoration through monuments, etc. And when you start looking at that, the boundaries don't really matter, because it's again looking at processes rather than at kind of local traditions. And of course, the local tradition are going to make specificities, but that's not the main importance here. So yes, I agree. Sorry.
Thank you. There's one question from David. Have you done any work on earlier Irish or early Welsh Ogham inscribed stones and the sites with which they are associated?
So I haven't. I'm not specific research. I have used the Welsh corpus as a Bible throughout all my research, because I think it's one of the strongest, the kind of methodology that was put in place by mostly by Nancy Edwards is really the kind of Bible I've been following to try and record my sites, because I think it's really fantastic the way she's doing this, and kind of systematic recording. I've always wanted to look at the Ogham stones in Ireland and the kind of earlier monuments, like Roman monuments in Wales as well, because by focusing on what the kind of earlier things, the kind of shifts and transition and changes can be much more acute and clear, or the fact that it's all completely blurred and we just have to live with it. But I haven't been able yet, but that is very much in my plans for future research, if everything goes well.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. We're looking forward to that. So that's a really good endpoint, I think. Could you just remind people of the title of your book as well? Because there's been some questions about that.
Of course. I'm going to cut my video for 2 seconds, like that you can see how the cover is so pretty. I like this cover very much. So it's Carved Stones and Christianization, place movement and memory in early medieval Northwestern Europe. And it will be available from this autumn from Sidestone Press, and I think you can already pre-order it. So if you're interested, yeah.
Thank you. Absolutely will do. Just a comment then as well. There's somebody here who asked whether we have a general group for discussion, etc. But we don't really have that. And I also, just to tell everybody that there is a bit of a problem with advertising on Facebook, because every time we do, we have to switch comments off. If we don't, we get scammers who post fake links and take you to various pay sites where they want you to take your credit card details, etc. So generally we have to be very, very careful with discussions on Facebook, etc., because we get bombarded by the second 10 minutes before the seminar starts, and the second it starts, it's just flooded with really dodgy links. So it's difficult to keep a general forum for discussion. So I think we'll just, the best thing to keep the discussion going is probably to, have these seminars, and then we can keep talking to each other. But that was just a comment. And there's just so many comments here, and people say it's absolutely fantastic, wonderful talk.
Oh, thank you.
So informative.
I'm really happy. I'm really happy it came through. I have to say I saved the chat because I want to be able to read the comments. And also, if you want to reach out in any way or continue the discussion, my email address is anouk.busset@glasgow.ac.uk. I'm more than happy if you have a question that you really wanted me to answer, because I haven't been able to look at all the chat. There's a lot of things going on. I'm more than happy to engage and answer further things. And yeah, but thank you so very much for inviting me today. That was very exciting.
Well, thank you so much for coming today and for giving this fantastic talk. And so I'll just say thank you to you, and thank you for the audience coming along and for the fantastic questions.